Hi everyone, welcome to Sweet Pieces Inspirations. My name is Sydney and today we are going to learn how to do this knitted braided cable cowl. Now today's pattern is probably a little bit more on the intermediate to experienced level, and I will get into more details about that, why I have labeled it as intermediate or experienced. But as you see, I have a knit flat, and within this knit flat, which this is partial of the cowl itself, but within the knit flat, you see that there is some columns, and within these columns, there is some cabling. Now, once we get to a certain point, which is where I'm at, I'm going to try to give you how many rows you need to do up to a certain point, or I might even do measurements if it is easier for you to measure instead of counting the rows. But the point that I am at is we will bind off these columns here, and then we are going to continue doing the cable stitches, and once we get to a certain length of these cable stitches just themselves, we will braid those together, and then we'll come back around and sew them back on to the starting point of this cowl. So we will talk about the yarn first. What I am using for this one is Premier's Puzzle in the color Jigsaw. Now this is a bulky weight 5 yarn, and the knitting needle set is recommended is a 6mm, which that is what I'm using. Now if you need a swatch gauge, the swatch gauge will be down in the description box, and there is also 328 yards. One of these skeins should be perfectly fine for one of these cowls. You might even be able to get two. I'll see how it goes, and then I'll correct that in this video when I go to edit. So that is the yarn that is specifically on this cowl. So what else you're going to need is some knitting cable needles, preferably 3. If you don't have 3, then you can use a crochet hook or some DPNs. Now, the reason why we are going to need at least 3 potentially is when we go to bind off and start on the individual cables themselves so that we can braid them. The other 2 are just going to sit there while we work on the one. And then also you'll need your tapestry or darning needle to weave in your ends, and you are going to need to begin with a few stitch markers so that you can know where the cabling starts and where it ends. Once you actually work up the pattern a little bit, you can definitely tell where it starts and ends. And then also some scissors, of course. And if you might have not heard earlier, you will need a 6mm knitting needle. Now that will depend on how loose or tight you knit. There again will be a swatch gauge in the description box if you so choose to need to use one. But we will go ahead and get started. I have already got got my cast-ons on my knitting needles, and you will go ahead and cast on 40 stitches, and then once you get to those 40 stitches, I will go ahead and meet you for the first 2 rounds, and then we will get started on the cabling. For the first row, we will go ahead and knit the first 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go ahead and place my stitch marker here. We will knit 1, or purl 1, sorry. Let me move my lighting real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, we will knit the next 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Purl the next stitch, and then go ahead and place your stitch marker. This is the very first cable, and then we will knit the next 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Go ahead and place your stitch marker here, and now we are working on the second cable. So purl 1, knit 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Purl the next stitch. Go ahead and place your stitch marker. Knit the next 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead and place your stitch marker. Purl 1, knit 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Purl the next one. You can go ahead and place your stitch marker and then knit the last 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for row 2, we will go ahead and turn our work. We will start off with purling the first 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We will knit 1, purl 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Knit 1. So we have our first column made and our first cable starting of the cable made, we will go ahead and slip that stitch marker over, purl 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead and slip that stitch marker, purl or knit the first one, purl 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, knit 1, and that is what we are going to continue repeating. Go ahead and slip that stitch marker over, purl the next 4, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead and slip that stitch marker, knit 1, purl 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Knit 1, and then purl the next 4. Sorry about that. Now we are going to start on the repeating rounds for the cable, which is a 6-row repeat. Go ahead and grab your knitting cable needle. This is going to come in handy this go round. Once we have the first row repeat completed, it is going to be a breeze between the other 5 rows. So we will go ahead and get started. We will knit those first 4, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is part of the column, and slip your stitch marker over, purl that very first stitch. Now we are going to take our knitting cable and slip the next 3 stitches onto our knitting cable needle. We want to make sure that it is in the front. Go ahead and knit the next 3. So 1, 2, and 3. We're going to now take these 3 stitches that are on our knitting cable, and we are going to knit those 3. So 1, 2, and 3. Very, very simple. Purl the next stitch, which should be right before your stitch marker. Slip that stitch marker over, knit the next 4, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Slip that stitch marker over, purl the next stitch, and then we are going to take our knitting cable needle again, slip the next 3 onto your knitting cable needle, making sure it is in the front. Knit the next 3. So 1, 2, and 3. Now when you do go to knit this one again, I should have added this beforehand, but making sure these stitches aren't twisting. And then we are going to knit these 3 off of the knitting cable needle. So 1, 2, and 3. And knit or purl the last stitch. So that is the repeat for the first row repeat. Just continue doing that until you get to the last stitch, and then I will meet you for round 2 or the second row repeat. You should now have 4 of the columns, which is those 4 individual stitches, and then you should have the 3 sets of the cables. And now for the second, 4th, and 6th repeating rounds, we are going to turn our work. We are going to purl the first 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Knit 1. And then purl the next 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then you will knit 1, which should be right before that stitch marker. Slip that stitch marker over to your right hand knitting needle. Purl the next 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Slip that stitch marker over. Knit 1. Purl the next 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That is the repeating unit for the second, 4th, and 6th repeating rounds. You'll continue doing that until you get to the this round that we are currently on. And then once I have got this row completed, we will do the repeating rounds for the 3rd and 5th, and then we will start that all 6 of the repeating rounds over again. For the 3rd and 5th repeating round, we will knit the first 4, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Slip that stitch marker over, purl one, knit the next 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, purl one, slip that stitch marker over, knit the next 4, so 1, 2, 3, and 4, slip that stitch marker, purl one, knit the next 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl one, and continue repeating that until you get to the end of this round, which is again the 3rd round repeat and also the 5th round repeat. So just continue doing that until you reach 81 rows or 45 centimeters in total. And once you have got that completed, you should have something that looks like, let me zoom out real quick, a flat that looks like this. So you have your 4 columns of your stocking nut stitch and then the 3 of your cable stitches. Now we are going to start on the braiding part of this cowl, and we are actually going to decrease these column stitches while continue repeating the pattern for the cable stitches, and we'll jump right into that. Now you are going to need your all 3 of whatever you are using to grab those 2 extra cables that we are not going to work off right away. They'll be just sitting there until we get the very first one done. So go ahead and grab whatever that you are using to keep those stitches from unraveling, and we'll get started on this part. I do want to add in real quick that I did end up leaving off on the 2nd row repeat so that when we were doing these decrease of stitches, we didn't have to worry about doing another working with the cables as well. So the first 2 stitches we are going to, which you should be on the front side, knit those very first 2 stitches. And then the next 2, we will knit those 2 together. And then purl the next stitch, which will be the starting of the cable. And then knit the next 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl one, knit the next 2, 1 and 2, knit together the next 2. So I'm just knitting those 2 together, and then purl one, knit 6, purl one, and just continue doing that until you reach this round. Now, when you get to the end, instead of knitting 2 and then knit 2 together, we are actually going to go ahead and knit 2 together and then knit those last 2. So that would have been the 3rd row repeat for the cabling. So now we will go ahead and turn our work. And we are going to start off with knitting those first 2 together. Purl 1. And we are going to go ahead and bind off on this 1 stitch. Go ahead and turn your work, and in that very first stitch we will go ahead and purl that stitch and then purl the next 2 together. Knit the next one and then purl the next 6. Knit the next one, purl 1, and then purl 2 together. Knit 1. So continue doing that until you get to the end of this round, which again is also the 4th row repeat for the cabling. And then I will meet you for the 5th row repeat, and we'll continue decreasing those column stitches as well. Before we finish off on this row, when you get to the end, instead of doing the purl 1 and then the purl 2 together, we are actually going to go ahead and do the purl 2 together and then the purl 1. It just kind of keeps our edgings a little bit more straighter and a little bit more uniform. Go ahead and grab your cable knitting needles, and we'll start off with knit those very 2 together. Purl the next stitch, and then we are going to bind off that very first stitch. Now this is where your knitting cables are going to come in handy. So now we are going to knit the next 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Purl that last one, and then I'm going to go ahead and slip these onto my cable knitting needles. There should be 8 stitches on this cable knitting needle. And then we are going to, if you need to use stitch stoppers for this, you can. But now I'm going to knit the next 2 together. and then purl the next stitch and bind off that next stitch, or that very first stitch. Then knit the next 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Purl the next stitch, and then again I'm going to slip these onto my knitting cable needle real quick. So I've got all 8 of these on my knitting cable needles, and then the very first 8 that we did as well, which is the very first 2 cables. Now go ahead and knit the next 2 together. Purl the next stitch, and then go ahead and bind off. Now knit the next 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now we are going to slip that purl stitch, slip the next 2 stitches. I'm going to actually use a cable knitting needle for this part. I'm going to slip those last 2 stitches on my knitting cable needle, and then I'm going to slip that purl stitch onto my left hand knitting needle. All I'm doing is putting that purl stitch behind those what we'll knit 2 together, so that we can easily bind off. And then knit those 2 together. Can possibly be a little tight once you get into those stitches, but knit those 2 together, and then purl that last stitch, and then bind off that very first stitch. So you should have right now a cable that is on your knitting needle, a cable that is on the cable knitting needles, and then another one on the cable knitting needles, or whatever you are using in place of those. So we are going to work all 3 of these individually. This very first one, which we are on the 5th row repeat right now, also with these 2 as well. We will go ahead and do the 6th row repeat, and then or the 6th row repeat, and then we'll start the repeating rows again. You do want to note that when you go back to do these cables, you are on the 5th row repeat. So I'm going to go ahead and knit this one up, and then I'll come back and give you how long you need to, or how many rows you need to knit this one real quick. Each cable strand will have a total of 10 cables on it. So continue doing the repeating rounds for the cables, a total of 10 times for each strand. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now I did leave off on the 5th row repeats. There's really no rhyme or reason for that. That's just kind of how I worked out the pattern. I do want to remind you real quick, when you go to do the last 2 cables on the knit flat, we did leave off on the 5th row repeats. So when connecting or starting this strand, you will start with the 6th row repeat. Now each strand is individually on their own knitting cable. You will have to cut that very last one, because the way you braid, if you're going to braid tight or looser, will depend on which of these strands is going to be the one that we slip back onto our knitting needles first. So I will switch my camera around real quick and we will start the braiding portion of this cowl. We have cable 1, cable 2, and cable 3. So we are going to take cable 1 and place it over top of cable 2. So now cable 2 should be in cable 1's place, cable 1 should be in 2's place, and now we are going to take cable 3 and place it over the first cable. So now you have the very first cable all the way to our left, the last cable in the middle, and the second cable in first place. So we are going to always take cable 1, place it over cable 2, and take cable 3 and place it over cable 2. So just continue braiding until you can no longer braid anymore. Once you have your braid adjusted the way that you would like, I personally like mine a little bit tighter. We are going to slip these stitches back onto our knitting needle, and it's a lot easier if you do have a set of cable needles, but if you don't and you're using DPNs, we want to slip them on a way that this very last cable is going to be the one that we start off with first. So go ahead and slip your stitches back onto your needle, and then I will meet you for the next part. Now that each stitch is now on our needle, we are going to purl each stitch straight across. So again, that is a purl in each stitch. And then once you get to the end of this round, I will meet you for the next row. Once you've gotten that row completed, go ahead and turn your work. And now knit in each stitch until you get to the end of this row. Go ahead and turn your work, and now we are going to bind off. So go ahead and purl 1, purl the second one, and then bind off that first one. Again, purl 1, bind off that first stitch. Continue binding off, and then I will meet you for the sewing part of the braid onto the cowl. Before you cut your yarn, making sure that your cables aren't twisted, and other than the braid of course, but the back sides aren't facing the front. If everything is okay on that aspect, you can go ahead and cut your yarn and sew any kind of loose ends that you might still have. Now, how we are going to sew these two pieces together is we are not placing the braid on top of the knit flat. That is not what we want. Unless you want that look, of course you can. That is up to you. But we are sewing from edge to edge. So once you have these two pieces sewn together, this is how it should look. I haven't sewn them together just yet, but we are sewing from edge to edge, and I'm actually going to flip this on the back side and sew it that way so that I don't have a seam going across. So go ahead and sew however you would like. And after that, we are done with this cowl, and I want to congratulate you guys for sticking around as long as you have and making of this cowl itself. It definitely for me was not the easiest thing to really explain, but I do want to congratulate you guys. I'm going to go ahead and sew in my ends and then close this cowl off. That is the end of the braided cables cowl. If you did enjoy this tutorial, don't forget to give me a like, share, comment, or subscribe. But also check out my other tutorials. I do have some tutorial patterns on my YouTube page, but I also do written patterns as well on my Ravelry. If you are so interested, I do both knit and crochet. I do have some content as far as weaving and spinning goes, so feel free to check out the channel if you would like. But I hope you all have a wonderful day and enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you guys next time.